Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest was the head of the comics publisher ShortBox, as well as the person behind the digital comics fair, ShortBox Comics Fair. It's Zainab Akhtar. Thanks for coming on, Zainab.
Thanks for having me, David.
So we are recording this on the morning of Monday, April 8th in Alaska, and late afternoon for you. How's the day been?
It's been kind of busy, a little bit harried, just running around, trying to buy Eid gifts for everyone, getting ready for Eid. That's kind of it, really. But yeah, shopping, last minute shopping, which I should have done earlier.
One thing I've been curious about, as you know, we've been talking for a while about you possibly coming on the podcast because ShortBox was closing everything. And that just closed at the end of February. That's a big change. Obviously, you have other things coming up because, you know, it's Ramadan and you have Eid coming up. But I imagine your day-to-day life has changed significantly since ShortBox officially closed. Have you found that it's changed a bit, or is it still kind of too early to tell how things would shift for you?
I think maybe it's different from like viewing it from the outside. For me, it hasn't officially closed yet. I mean, the web shop has closed, but in terms of the back end, there's still a lot of work to do. I'm still shipping out retail orders and still talking to a lot of retailers who kind of want to take on, you know, the extra stock that we have left, seeing what titles we've got. And then also talking to my authors about like any stock we have left, whether they want copies or what they want to do with it, this kind of situation. And then, of course, we've got all the royalties that I've still got to work out once that's done, and then all that. And then we've got a distributor contract that needs wrapping up. We've got storage contract. I need to recycle any remaining stock. So life hasn't changed that much. I really wish it had, because I want to be like at the end of the tunnel, through the tunnel, I guess. And I really want to do nothing for a while, but I'm not there yet. I mean, I feel like it's really close. maybe the end of the month, early May. But yeah, although the web shop has closed, like the back end is still fairly busy for me at the moment anyway.
I think that's one of the interesting things about a person who's running a publisher like you were/are. I mean, you are still, because you have all those things to do. But I would often see, I read a lot of stuff in preparation for this, and I would often see you described as a tastemaker. And the funny thing is like, yes, you are a tastemaker, but you're also like an administrator and a marketer and a resource manager and a distributor and doing all these things. And that's the thing that I think is really interesting about what you're doing, is when you're taking on all this stuff, you're not just taking on the role of like, I'm going to, you know, have Winchester make out of style and then sell that and it's going to be awesome. You're also setting yourself up to have to make sure everyone gets that and make sure everyone knows about that and all this stuff. And that's a lot. That's why it's like, you may have closed at the end of February to me, but like, you're probably not going to close until May, and that seems completely reasonable. I just think that's interesting. It's the outside perspective of what you do must be wildly different than what you actually did.
Yeah, I think it increasingly became something that I really struggled with, because when I started ShortBox, it wasn't supposed to be a publishing effort. The idea of it, what it was, I used to blog about comics, which seems like a very long time ago, and we had like a really lovely but dedicated audience, and people used to say to me all the time, oh, you know, when you review comics, like I would just send you the link, or just if you made a bundle of comics that, you know, you said, well, read these, send them out and they'd be really good, we'd buy it. So it's supposed to be just, I guess, more distribution, a selected bundle of comics. And that's how it originally started. When I did the first box and I reached out to artists, it was most of those comics, they already existed. So I didn't have any involvement in terms of like publishing. You know, I brought them, it was a wholesale transaction. So I'd say, hey, can we have like X, Y amount of copies from you, and like pay a wholesale price. And then I would put them in a bundle and sell them on as the bundle. But that, the extent to which I didn't know what I was doing, it was quickly clear that wasn't going to work, just in terms of like the logistics of, you know, the people that I wanted to work with were dotted all around the world, not just in the UK. So then shipping became like a really big factor. Like if somebody in Australia was going to print 100 copies of their comics and ship them to me, and then somebody in the US was doing that, and then somebody in India was doing that, it was just so much money. And the other thing was that whenever I approach people about, do you have a comic that's in the works, or have you made something new, they were more interested in creating something new. And then it just kind of evolved into like printing, and then eventually, oh well, I should I'm printing these books and we're making them new. I may as well be involved in like, a little bit more involved in terms of editing. But to bring it back around, and I'm just talking about like, the origins of it, because I want to stress that I had no idea
Yeah.
what it would eventually involve, because what it became was something entirely different. It became a publishing operation. So because we started from there, and then I kind of blindly went into, oh, now we're printing these books, and then now I guess I'm involved in editing them, and just gradually more and more responsibility, taking on more and more roles. And I think from there, people's perceptions also began to change, and not just perceptions in terms of an audience, but also perceptions in terms of like people, cartoonists who we would work with. Because I think initially that the audience, they very much knew, oh, that's Zainab from like, she used to write about comics, and it was, people were really patient, and they were like, oh yeah, and then as the audience grew, we got a lot of people who just view ShortBox as a company. So there's no idea of like, oh, there's one person behind this. You get all these emails, they treat you like Amazon.
Yeah.
Like people are contacting you over Instagram, Twitter, all these kind of things. And then same with like author perceptions. I think like there's, in a way, you kind of, I don't want to sound like really big-headed, but you become like a victim of your own success. So even though you're really small and you're one person trying to do all these things, like, oh, I'm the marketer, I'm the distributor, I'm the person who literally packages and posts all these things, I'm the proofreader, I'm the editor, I'm the person who goes to conventions, I'm the admin, I'm the customer service. But people have no idea about that, and people don't really care. Also, from an author's perspective, like people who I was approaching about wanting to work together. So the expectations also became outside, because there's from the outside, it's like, oh, you're a successful publisher. And they have no idea whether it's one person or 10 behind the scenes. And, it's not something that you would really ask or like, so it's just like people, I think, started to expect like, oh, are you going to send me on a book tour?
Yeah.
This kind of thing. I was like, oh, well, I don't, and I'm just sat at home, like trying to post. It's just like, yeah, it became a really strange thing to deal with. And then, no matter how much you say, even now with the fair, like I'll get emails from cartoonists, and they'll say, oh, hey, ShortBox team, or hey, ShortBox gang, this kind of thing. And I know it's not a big thing, it's not a big deal, but to me, as one person, like to me it feels really personal.
Yeah.
Because I am one person, and I am like doing all of this and pouring so much into it. So even though that may not be the intention of people on the other end, like to me, I do feel it a lot. So it becomes something, I think it became like really apparent that it's just, I think I became more conscious because I have no background in publishing or, in comics, even apart from like just writing about comics. I had really very little idea of what it would involve. And then the more I learned, I was like, maybe I don't know if I should be doing this, because I feel I'm good at one thing, which is sort of curation, right? And like discovering talent, taste making, I guess is what you said.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not good at all these other things. But genuinely, like, I'm not a marketer. Like, if you're a publisher, there are people that you hire for these roles specifically. There's a social media manager, there's a marketer, there's like, these people. And I can't do I was trying to do all the jobs very poorly. It just became really clear that it's just, I guess it started to weigh on me a lot more. And also because it's not something you can really negotiate with, whether it's the audience or with the cartoonist. So I think like that was played a significant role in like making the decision to close. I mean, there were so many factors, but that was definitely one. And those that like thing that you touched on upon, like, the perspective of it from the outside and how it's like a lot of the time I just felt like I was scrambling all the time. Like I still doing, because it's not over, kind of, I still do. Like we were chatting just before we started recording, like feeling really harried because I've got so much to do still. And just felt like that all the time, like, in terms of mental health, like there's just like this running list that sort of never ends of things that I've got to do this, I've got to do this, I've got to do this. And it sort of felt like I'm letting a lot of people down all the time as well, because it's just like emails that aren't responded to, things that are just delayed because you're trying to do so much, and it's just not possible to do all of it, as a one person operation.
I definitely relate to the team thing. I was actually going to bring that up because I do sketch and off panel by myself. And also every year I do a print annual of my work. And my wife and I are putting that together right now. And I always get emails from people like, saying something like, "Hey, sketch team," or "Hey, David and everyone else on the sketch team." And it's interesting because I find that sometimes when I get emails like that, it makes me hyper aware of the fact that what I'm doing is too much. And it like kind of makes me feel overwhelmed in the moment. And I know that people don't mean anything by that or anything like that, or they don't even know. I mean, if you just look at the byline or listen to the podcast, I'm the only person that shows up. But did you find that sometimes it was like you were so in like survival mode that you weren't even aware of how much you were doing, and then like things like that would kind of break you out and be like, "Oh my God, what am what am I doing?"
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes, but I feel like generally I'm pretty self-aware, and I knew it was a lot. I think it's, yeah, I don't really have like a great answer, but it's just a weird thing because I knew it was always going to be like when I did make that transition from, doing the like distribution to like the printing, and then now I guess we're publishing these books, and I guess we're publishing them beyond like just the box, and we're going to conventions now and all this kind of thing. There was definitely a period of ignorance where it was just kind of like, we're going to conventions now. Isn't this great? You know what I mean? Oh,
Yeah.
look, people love our books and it's so nice. Um, and then after that, it was just, yeah, I guess, I don't know. I can't pinpoint a point where I actually thought, what the hell am I doing? But it was just, I think it's like when you start to feel just constantly stressed. And it's not that I don't love it. Like I still love it and I still wish I wish there was a role for me, where I could just do the thing that I feel that I'm really good at. Where, I I think like for example, I remember making a few social media posts that, oh, like, ShortBox is gonna end, like this company, this guy got in touch with me, and he was like, "Oh, well, we really like what you're doing." And this was like the first time anybody had gotten in touch with me about like investment. And he was like, "Oh, we'd be potentially interested if like," and we had like, it was so strange. We had like a Zoom meeting, and so I was like, "Oh, so what do you want to do?" And he was like, he didn't want to say anything. He was like, "Oh, I can't say anything without NDA." And I thought to myself, why are we having this meeting? You can't say anything. And I was like, "So what is it that you sent me this email, you set up this meeting. What is it that you want?" And he was like, "Oh, well, if you to keep ShortBox going, if there's like, if you could give us a figure or something, or if you could like, send us some figures about how your books are doing, and then we could all this and stuff." So I think at the end of it, the gist I got was like, "Oh, we'd be interested potentially in investing." And then I went away and I thought about it, and I was like, I don't actually want to continue, because at first it's always, I always go the way like, wow, somebody's gonna want to give me money to like carry on doing this. I was like, I don't want to carry on doing this, because the problem isn't that, yeah, I mean, like money is always a problem. Let's be frank about that, like in indie comics. But the problem was that I just don't want to run a business, I don't want to do all the things that I'm doing. I just want a editorial director sort of role or curator sort of role. I don't want to carry on doing all this stuff, even if there is more money involved. Yeah, so I guess I'm always conscious of having so much to do, and you're definitely right. Like when somebody emails you like that, I always feel like, again, it's sort of like that thing about like you're a victim of your success because you made it to a level, like the thing that you're presenting is at a level where it seems like like it's a polished operation, that it seems like there's so many people involved, right?
Right. Yeah.
That there must be like it's kind of like a company or some kind of corporation or something. Yeah, I mean it's really difficult to sort of counteract that. And I don't know how you feel about it, but I always like, I just I really struggle with that kind of thing, because I don't know, I just like when you are pouring so much into it and then you get these kind of like oblivious emails, then I don't, nobody needs to be like aware of the inner workings of, like what goes on and everything. But I just feel like some kind of basic research. If you're, if you're going to email someone like, "Hey, ShortBox team," and I'm like, but I don't think people really, I genuinely think people don't care to that level. Like, I remember, again, like with the fair there, I'm dealing with individual artists and, people I've worked with, and I've said, like, I'm one person, and I still get those emails in, "Hey, ShortBox team." I'm like, okay, I guess, but what can you do? I don't know.
It is really interesting. I'm going to give a quick explanation for listeners about ShortBox. Like ShortBox started in 2015 as a print-to-order quarterly box of comics prints and, amongst other things, candy. After you had closed Comics and Cola, which was your comics criticism site for several years, Eisner-nominated comics criticism site. And ShortBox was where you curated the comics, cartoonists, and artists featured within. And then that has led into the ShortBox Comics Fair, which is every October you basically feature a boatload of comics, cartoonists, and creative teams on a comics fair where I think last year was about 100 total comics, right?
I think it was 130.
Okay. There was a lot. And so it's a digital only, and you just buy the PDFs on there, and that will be continued onward. ShortBox isn't. But one of the things I thought was really interesting as I was researching for this interview is that you had actually originally announced that you were going to close ShortBox in April 2022. You said that on Twitter, and that you said they were going to close at the end of 2023 originally. And the interesting thing is like you asked me kind of how I feel sometimes. To be honest, I don't say this very often. I think about quitting Sketch and Off Panel all the time, like all the time. And it did make me wonder, like, that was when you announced it. How long had you been kind of dealing with these feelings about, like, what do I want to do with this if this isn't really what I want to do? If I want to just do editorial and curation, but I don't want to do everything else. Was that something that was kind of living with you well before then?
Yeah, I mean, I'm the kind of person that I always really, if I have an idea of there's something I want to do, I really let it gestate for quite a while before I'm sure. I am pretty decisive, but I still like to. So there were a lot of factors. One was what we talked about, just that feeling of feeling overwhelmed and, taking on more than you sort of anticipated. The other thing was like Brexit really affected small businesses in the UK and, independent creators. So like the price of everything, I know this is something that we say, so maybe like meaning when we say the price of everything is going up, all the time. But it's just like insane, like about 5 times more what we were paying, like not so for shipping. So like we have to charge people more, like, mainly our business, ShortBox business was done, online through web shop. So you have to hike up postage prices, you have to hike up comic prices, costing more to print. Like we've always printed in the UK and, never like abroad. So all our printing is done domestically. So it's just like the prices became like a really big factor. And it's also like everything we ship to Europe. Previously, there were no like custom charges, no, nothing like this. I feel like I never got like a return package from Europe. And now with Brexit, there's, books get charged, customs, VAT, whatever. And we get so many return packages and it's just so much extra work. I know it sounds like something, again, that's really small, like, oh, you're getting return packages. And again, it's on the one hand, I was thinking like, why am I even having to deal with packages? Like, I shouldn't be doing this. Like, I hate doing it. I hate the shipping process. Oh, now I have to pack all these books. Now I have to send them out. And now people are like, mad, why didn't I get it? I didn't pay the custom fee. It's been returned. Can you resend it? So it just became like so much more stressful. It became so much more expensive. And I think it became clear to me that down the line, it really wasn't going to be viable for me anymore. The print side of things anyway. I mean, I'm pretty lucky, like I have housing security. And so the reason I was able to make ShortBox work is because I don't really need a lot of money. I mean, as long as I can pay my bills and, I've got enough money to feed myself, I'm okay. But even that it wasn't working anymore. So yeah, so that was like another big factor. Like shipping prices are still going up.
Oh yeah.
Every day. And when you're the only person behind it, like it all impacts you. So, I get so many emails, just angry emails, like, oh, I put this many books in my basket and then the postage was this price and that's absolutely obscene and I'm not going to buy from you. And I was like, okay, like what can I do about it? Like I literally am losing money because I hate hiking up prices as well. I think like if you look at our prices, they never actually change because like the box price never changed over all the years. It was £35 when we started, it was £35 when we finished. One of the really important things for me, I know like actually I'm very aware that comics are kind of like a luxury item. Most of them are expensive. Most of them, it's like I feel like it's a very middle class pursuit, both in terms of like the people who consume it and the people who create it. And I wanted to make them cheaper, and I feel like they were cheaper, the ones that we made from compared to what most of what I saw. So yeah, I mean, it was a combination of like both those things, I think, really, and that was kind of where like the fair came from. I guess the idea of it. Part of it was born from like COVID as well. So when COVID happened, like all the conventions obviously shut down.
Right.
And it was super interesting to me to see like the alternative that people were offering. So, like all these big conventions, and they were like, oh, well, we're going digital. And their digital alternative was just like, here's a link to all our exhibitors' web shops.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, how is that a digital convention? Like, either don't do it or do it properly, right? I know that sounds like, but so if you can't do it, just say, look, it's COVID, we'll be back when we can be back, right? But they were like, oh, here's a digital convention. And I was like, that's not a digital convention. And like, for me, like a digital convention or any kind of convention, it has to offer you something. The audience has to be offered something that makes them want to go, oh, I want to go there, or I have to, that's something that I want to be part of it. Like if you've got, let's say I've got Tom, Dick and Harry's web, they're all making comics and they've all got websites and I can buy from them any day of the week. So a convention putting together a load of artists, web shops, like, well, how is that in any way, offering something new? Like I can, any day of the week I can go to their web shops. And then some people were trying to charge for that. Or like you have to pay his money, and I was like, what?
The whole convention scene during 2020, when everyone was trying to figure out what to do, was pretty wild in the sense that like nobody knew what they were doing, but they were doing it with confidence. And I was just like, I don't know if these are the right decisions some of these times, but hey, I guess it's for them to decide. I wasn't going to pay for it, that's for sure.
Yeah, that was another thing. And then that was kind of like the point where I got to thinking, like, why isn't there a digital convention? Like it doesn't really make sense. Like digital is so huge, it's so accessible. Like you can on the internet, you can basically reach anyone, and there isn't any kind of digital comics convention. And I think the reason why there isn't one is because like it's difficult to offer people something new, right? Like even if you have digital comics, again, like I said, like those digital comics are going to be available probably prior to your convention. So you're not, again, like why would people want to come to a digital comics convention? So then I came up with the idea that actually, I don't know how I come up with these things, that if everybody, instead of like having web shop links, like if we had, say, a roster of cartoonists, like if we had 10 cartoonists and each cartoonist is making something brand new, and then all those brand new comics are going to be only part of the convention, then you're offering people something new, right? So there's a reason for people to actually. So yeah, that was where the fair started from. It was like a risk for people. Like the first year I did it, I didn't like there was no money involved in terms of like I didn't charge artists anything because like I was really conscious of the fact that they're taking a chance on me because there's no like guarantee of any kind of return, when you're doing that. So I really appreciate like it was a lot of the people I'd worked with before, like took a chance and or trusted me. So like that first year was kind of like a beta year. I think we had like 40 people, so 40 new comics. And it did pretty, and I also feel super lucky. Like I know this might sound trite, but I feel like I have like a really good core audience that follow me from project to project. And it's not like a massive audience, but I feel, it's that kind of thing where, I read this article about like this Instagram influencer and she had like hundreds of thousands of like followers, right? And she made some t-shirts and she tried to sell them. And I think nobody brought a t-shirt.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's that kind of thing. So like quality of followers. So it's not about like how many followers you have, but it's actually other people that following you, what do they expect from you, right? So if you're just part of somebody's Instagram feed, or this person kind of makes like pretty pictures, whatever, I'll just give them a follow. But if people are actually expecting, oh, I'm following this person, they're making comics, I like comics, I want comics. And I feel like we have a decent core audience, and also there's like a lot of trust built up there. So I think that's also really integral to sort of, the fair's success, such as it were.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Looking for the right place to read digital comics? You can find it at Omnibus. Omnibus is a modern digital comic book store and reader app carrying your favorite single issues, volumes, and omnibuses all day and date. It's just like a comic shop where you pay per book, but digital. Omnibus has even upped its game lately, adding an iPhone version of the app with Android coming very soon. That gives you more about what you love about Omnibus, but in your pocket. Looking for an ideal digital comic store, but with an excellent shopping and reading experience? One that uses novel discovery features to help fans find their next new favorite book, and one that features many of the best comics and publishers today, including publishers like Image, Boom, Dark Horse, and more. You can find that all on Omnibus. Visit the web store or download the app today at omnibus.app. And now, back to the show. So, going off what you were saying involving the social media thing, the influencer, one of the things I think is interesting is, so my site is a subscription one, so people have to pay to be able to read the articles. I don't like doing that. I have to admit, I hate having a paywall. I prefer people just being able to read whatever. But one thing I have found is that the articles that get the most likes and engagement on social media typically do not generate very much in terms of subscriptions. But the ones that are like the most kind of like focused and like reflective of my identity of what I do generate quite a few subscriptions, even if they're not generating a lot of traction on social media. I think sometimes people have this like, there's like the low hanging fruit of social media engagement. And then there's like the kind of depth of the ones where people really engage. But I did want to say one thing I really love about the ShortBox Comics Fair is that I love ShortBox of all varieties, but ShortBox Comics Fair, I love that there's 113 different comics on there. And I go on there because I'm like, oh my God, I got to get Lucy Bryan's Ocean, which was my favorite comic from last year. And I absolutely love it. And then like David Brothers, Nick Dragatis Fight Like Hell. I'm like, I'll buy anything that those guys do. But then as I'm going through and I'm flipping through the art and I'm checking out the covers and everything like that, I find something like Cloud Lee's Auntie. And I love that comic. I love that comic. I was actually...
It really went under the radar.
Yeah.
It was amazing. Yeah.
I was going through, honestly, like I was going through some of people's recommendations, just like, is anybody else recommending Auntie? Because I need more people to read this comic because it's so good. And I mean, like that comic was amazing. And I almost certainly would have not have found it anywhere else because two things. One, I don't know anybody else who would have published it. And two, the comics fair has this area of effect that like those convention things wouldn't, because it's all in the same place. It all has the same art. And it helps you find like the next cartoonist voice or the next comic you're going to love. Like I really loved the Three Body Problem also. I thought that was a really good comic. And like those are two books I wouldn't have bought if they were just at probably a comic convention, even a physical one, because I might have skipped by it because I'm like, I'm not sure if I know who this person is. And I think that's one of the cool things about the comics fair is that it really helps with discoverability and for people, even your core audience, to find new voices.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess that is kind of like the basis of it. I think a lot of it, for me, is just I get to do what I enjoy, which is sort of the curator aspect of it. I'm not involved in any way in like the making or editing comics whatsoever, but I enjoy putting it together for sure. I mean, at the moment, like if I'm honest with you, like it's just always about, trying to, I don't know if a day's going to come where I'm like, oh, I can't see myself here anymore. But when I knew ShortBox was going to end, and then it's like, oh, well, I still want to be in comics. So I have to kind of like make something new. And, like this kind of, I don't know if this, again, it's going off on a tangent. I don't know how actually valid it may be. But I feel like, as like a Muslim Pakistani woman, like I'm somebody with no, publishing background or whatever. Like when I started out, like there was no like nobody was offering me any kind of jobs and everything. And I find it interesting that like 10 or so years later, if you could say that like, oh, I've proven myself or whatever, dozen Eisner nominations, Ignatz Award wins or whatever. But there still isn't like a space for me, like and I'm not expecting people to fall over, but you would just think that like, I don't know. So it's just about continually trying to, like, I guess I have to create something because like, you create this thing, but when that's over, it's like actually there's still not, you have to go on to making the next thing. And it's kind of exhausting, because, like I said, like, it's not like, it's not financially rewarding either. Like for the 3 or 4 years that we've been doing the fair, I've been operating at a loss. And so this year, I'm I think I'm taking a percentage, but only so there's previously I used to charge like an exhibiting fee, and that went towards the cost. And this year there's no exhibiting fee, but a percentage of sales. So I mean, I know like it's really interesting because I can see who buys all these comics. So, and people come up to me like there are viz editors, manga editors, comic publishers. Like lots of these books have gone on to be like published, picked up, and from an artist perspective, like, I'm really happy for the artists. I'm glad that like there are editors looking at the thing, getting work. So and they make some money too, hopefully. Yeah, I mean, I kind of like it seems sometimes I'm just like it's like I don't know. There's like the pros and cons of it because sometimes I feel like, oh, why should I always have to make something new? Like always build this shit from the ground up,
Right.
And it's like, oh, here's the next thing. And sometimes it feels like I went through a period last year, where I was getting these emails, like this French publisher emailed me, oh, can you, before last year's fair, can you send me all the comics so I can see which ones I want to publish? And I was like, no, I just didn't reply to him because I thought, fuck off. But it's just like, why, just buy them.
Right.
They're not expensive. You're a publisher. You're not like I looked him up. It's not like a one man operation like me. You know what I mean? You've got money, and I just find it so rude.
Yeah.
And I feel like I went through this thing because I wasn't making any money from it. And it felt like everybody else was benefiting apart from me. Like for the artists, I don't mind because I'm like, artists should get the world. That's all great. But like all these publishers, like picking the books up. And I was at TCAF last year and this like guy was saying, publisher, remain unnamed. And he was like, oh, it's so our books get picked up by bigger publishers. So he was talking about his own publishing outfit. So he was like, oh, our books get picked up by bigger companies, and then it's like the bigger companies make all the money off it. But I was like, oh well, that seems fair because because you're a small publisher and you can't afford to pay the artists enough money where like you can't pay them like a 5-figure sum where you're buying the rights from them. So the only way you can work with the artist is you're not buying the rights from them because you're paying them such a small amount of money. So if a big publisher comes and then publishes their books, that's great because they're paying the artist. But he's like moaning that, or like he should get a fee, And then I found it so funny because they publish a lot of fair comics.
Yeah.
And I was you're literally one of their whole publishing slates because was like half of it was like ShortBox Fair titles. And I said to him that, like maybe you should pay me a fee, And he was like,
Hilarious joke.
Oh. So it doesn't work that way, I guess,
I do think that's interesting because it reminds me of varying sports, but the one it reminds me most of is in Major League Baseball in America. There's like teams like the Oakland A's who are bad, but they occasionally get good players. And what will happen is they'll be good for a little bit until they become free agents, and then they become great for the best teams. And because the best teams have the most money. And it's created a situation where basically there's like within the same league, there's like almost like a minor league system feeding into the rich teams. And it's kind of like that in the sense that it seems like almost some publishers outside of you are like, we just like keeping an eye on ShortBox Comics Fair, see what people are talking about, see what people are responding to, and then being like, we should pick this up. I don't know. That's pretty wild that somebody would ask for you to send them all. I mean, like most of them are not that expensive. A lot of them are like £6.
I know they're not expensive. I know, but that's why I think I really went through like a slump because I was like, oh, but yeah. I genuinely don't know how long it's going to last. Like I'll be honest because it's one of those initiatives where it is what it is because I have to build it from the ground up. At the moment, it's still me, just me.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, oh, I'm going to do it differently this time around because I've learned so much, and this time I'm going to like delegate and get help. But it all comes down to resources, and I don't have any, so I don't know how different it's going to be. But I think it's really sad in a way because I just feel like these are like good projects. But because it's just like one person with limited resources, and I'm not just speaking specifically about like my experience, but I know there are other people, like it's the comics ecosystem, right? This is what happens because there are people who are just doing all the work and you just get burnt out because you cannot do it. You can't continue to do it. Like there's no money. um, there's so much work involved, and there's only, which is why, like, people in comics are always so young. Like I'm starting to go to conventions now, and I just felt like everybody was so young.
Yeah.
It's like I was one of the oldest people in the room, or I felt really old. Or certainly like the people that I used to see at conventions, I don't see them anymore. And that's just because I think at some point you have to make, if you're not making money, which most people aren't, um, you have to decide that, like, you have to make the decision, like, what's viable for me, especially if you're going to have a family, you've got like people dependent on you, this kind of thing. Like, how long can you sustain like this incredibly time consuming side passion? Or it's just not workable.
Are you already working on the 2024 fair?
Yes. Yeah. Well, so yeah, last year, so we had the application was open, and then we got like, I think it was about 1,600.
Whoa.
And yeah, 1,600 applications, and then I whittled them down to about 150 acceptances. Yeah, so like people are working on the comics at the moment. So we have like a Discord just for the exhibitors. So everybody's working. So I do get to see what people are working on. It's really cool. Um, but so yeah, I think it's usually, this is like the quiet period in terms of like what I have to do on my end. It's just like it's a bit of social media where I have to do like the exhibit announcements. And then July is where it really, August, September, October are like the full on periods where I like work my ass off.
Do you view the ShortBox Comics Fair comics differently than you viewed like the print ShortBox releases? Like, because I mean, one is digital only, which I imagine allows. I mean, obviously you can produce more, you can publish more, but then on top of that, it's like you're not having to do like fancy foil stuff, or you're not having to do a fold out map or something like that, like in Minotaur, or like any number of other things that you would do with those books. Do you view those comics differently because they don't have the physical format for you?
Well, I think there is a distinct difference, and that's that I'm not publishing the fair comics.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you're kind of hosting them.
Yeah, so it's like a convention where everybody brings one comic, right? And
Right.
I'm the organizer of I'm the person who's like selected all the people who are coming to the fair. But I'm not, like I said, I'm not involved in any way, and it's not I'm not like I'm not publishing. I know, like, it's confusing because a lot of the artists use that kind of language and terminology, or like, I'm making this comic for the fair, or it's published, and it's kind of losing battle to, I think, try. And I do say, like, this is not like a ShortBox fair.
Right.
ShortBox, these are like fair comics, because I don't edit them like ShortBox comics. I would, like, I'd be like, I'd be involved, pitch me the comic, or here's, like, oh, I don't think this is working, and feel like do this, so I was really involved at some stages, like, if I need to be. But the fair comics, like I said, it's just I'm, I guess, like the fair director, curator, whatever you want to call it. So I select the people, I select the work, well, the artist, not the work. And then they make whatever kind of comics that they want. And then, of course, I just host the fair in October. So yeah, there is a difference in my mind.
I did want to ask about the production value of the ShortBox books, because honestly, like, I love a very well produced book, and I love just like, I don't know, things that really kind of complement the work in really specific ways. Like I brought up Minotaur, Alyssa Trayman's Minotaur, and its fold out map. You don't really get a lot of fold out maps in comics, and when I got to that, I was like, oh my god, I'm so excited about this. But throughout your run at ShortBox, there was like the production value was amazing. Was the physicality of ShortBox's varying projects and what went into bringing these books to life especially important to you? Because it kind of felt like it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's super important to me. Like, I don't really understand people who don't find it important, because I read books, like, I think, where the paper isn't right. Like, so many comics, for example, are printed on glossy paper.
Yeah.
And this is like my personal, it's horrible to me, because the art will be so nice, and it's almost never, 99%, it's not the right choice to print comics on glossy paper. And it takes so much away. Like, I know it just sounds like a bugbear, but actually, you know what, that book would look so much better if it was printed on the correct paper, and if it was given the right treatment. I mean, I know some things are like, foil, that's just like an additional flourish, but things like paper stock, And I feel like it's really important. And size, print dimensions, again, is super important. Like sometimes I think once I mess up or something, and I definitely didn't take into account, and like sometimes like the text isn't legible, if you print too small. It depends on like the art. Like if an artist has like a super detailed art style, then it's like James Stockow, for example. Like I love James and his work. And if you're going to print his work small, like that's just like, why would you print it at all?
That's just cruel and
You know?
unusual for readers
Yeah,
too. Yeah.
exactly. His work is so detailed. So of course, and you really want that to be shown off. So like there are so many different factors. So like, art style, color, it depends again, like what kind of work people are doing. And I see so many, I think it genuinely, whether people recognize it or not, like it genuinely takes away or adds to, the reading experience. Like I recently read, no, it wasn't recent, I think it was last year. There was a new Penelope Bajou book.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm saying that right because I can't pronounce French at all. Um, but it was just like printed on the thinnest paper, so you could actually see you could see page to page, you could see the next page through.
Yeah.
And it was like the book is brilliant. Like it was such a good book. One of the best books I read last year. It was just like horribly done. And then even like actually last week I read the new Taiyo Matsumoto, which I again really loved, and it's called Tokyo These Days. It's about like a manga editor. It was really relatable, but again like the printing is off. Like I don't know what's going on with the paper and the blacks, and it's just like why. And he's a superstar. And that's printed by Viz's signature line, which is supposed to be like the fancy line. And like, how do you let that get through? Again, like I don't know, like if people if this comes across as pedantic, but I genuinely feel that it does add and take away, like whether you recognize it again, whether you recognize it or not, like sometimes you're reading something, whether it feels cramped, or sometimes like, somebody has printed something too big and you don't realize why it's feeling not right. And also I think when I started out, it was just about like I really love print books, and I was also inspired a lot by Piao, who are like amazing. Those guys are like probably the best in terms of production and design. Like I don't know anything about it, but like I don't have any kind of background. I mean, all those guys are artists, and so it's very much about just like learning those things. And it's really funny because I feel like I was just really starting to get a good eye towards the end, because it definitely messed up a good few times. Because I know that on the first printing of Sobek, like when we did the foil, it was just sort of sitting on top, so the details were not coming through. And then we did the second printing and we fixed that. But yeah, I feel like it adds a lot. It can add a lot. It can take away a lot. In terms of print, like it really is such an integral part of the experience of reading any book.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I really loved about it too, about like what you would put into the book, and also like to emphasize, people can't see this, but I'm gonna hold it up for you. Like this is just a stack of books, and like you just looking at all the different sizes in there, and like you mentioned that, I think that's one of the things that's really interesting is like I would a lot of times, especially when it came to the boxes or the Kickstarters where there was multiple books, I wouldn't really look at the details because I just trusted what you were going to do with the books. I just knew that there were books that I was interested in. And so when I was so excited whenever I'd get a ShortBox package in, because first off, it was so well packaged. Like you had like the beautiful look for the ShortBox box, and then you would open it up and then you'd find all the treasures inside, and they'd always be like different sizes, or there'd be like I really like, there's like the Don't Go Without Me, like kind of making of book, but then there's also the one for I See a Night, and like you would have things like that, or there'd be candy. Especially during the pandemic, I felt like the peak of the pandemic when I was getting mail in, it felt like this like magical treasure that was coming into my house, and I was opening it up and I wouldn't know what I'd find, but it was always delightful. And I think that's one of the cool things about the production stuff too, is because you didn't have this like one size fits all approach, it made the opening of the package itself that much more special in a way.
Oh, that's so kind. I'm glad though. I hope, like, I think that was like the idea behind the boxes, especially. Like I'm super proud of the boxes. I don't think I could do them now because it's so exhausting.
You mean the quarterly boxes?
Yeah, well, I don't think we ever got to quarterly. I think
Quarterly-ish.
3 a year was like the most it was so just difficult to wrangle like 5 people, working on books and trying to get them all those 5 books ready at the same time. And like somebody would just be like, "Can I have more time? Oh, it's not ready." I'm like, "No," because everybody has the same deadline. And this impacts like if your book is not ready, I can't publish the books because I pre-sold it and they come as a package and this kind of thing. But when I started doing the boxes, like I know it started as a bundle and then it kind of went on. But even then, like the idea was at that time, like subscription boxes were really popular. And I'm not
Yeah.
just talking about Loot Crate because Loot Crate was shit. It was just like, oh, whatever's left in the warehouse, let's just bang in the box. You
Yeah.
know, but people were doing like really interesting things. Like I know they were like my friend Andy showed me like this food magazine bundle that you could get, and there was a lot of these kind of things going around. Like there's something called Wrap Magazine, which sort of does a different kind of graphic design and wrapping paper. Again, it sounds a bit out there, but it was interesting. It's just like there was a lot of creative stuff going on, but there was never something like that for indie comics. And I understand it's really hard to do, but I thought it'd be so nice. Like people say that, oh, I made the thing that I wanted to see, and I think that is one time I actually didn't make the thing that I would have liked. I would have liked to be on the receiving end of something like that. So I'm exceptionally proud of like the boxes. I think that the whole experience is always like that. Like, as I feel like I might have painted like as negative a picture of it. But at the same time, when I stop and think about it, and I don't know if you have this kind of reflection also, it's like actually there's nowhere else that I could have gone, or even now could go and do exactly what I want, the way I wanted to do it. Like I look on all the comics that I've done, hand on heart, I can genuinely say that, like they may not have come out the way I wanted in terms of like from pitch to like finished product, but there was never like something that I thought, oh, we're going to do this for the money.
Yeah.
Like this kind of thing. Oh, I'm just going to publish this. Like so many publishers. And I understand it's like it's business, right? Because you have to do the books that you genuinely care about, then you have to do the ones that you think are gonna like rake in some cash. So like, but I feel like, oh, how lucky was I that I got to work with all these amazing people. I got to make everything, like put out books that I'm like, there's not a single book that I just did it because I wanted to do it and it came out like, there was no other reason for publishing those books. That how many publishers can say like, we just publish exactly what we want to publish.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things about this, I was reading this transcript of a panel that you did at Thought Bubble, I don't know, like 2014 with like Make It Then Tell Everybody with Douglas Woke and Laura Snapes, I want to say. And you were talking about, it was about comics journalism and it was about comics criticism. And everyone else was talking, they were asked about like why you do what you do. Like, what is your purpose? And Douglas and Laura had like very specific like thoughts on that. And you're like, I don't have a purpose when I'm writing. I just do it for myself. And I think that that's one of the things that's really interesting about what you did is that like it goes back to the idea of curation. And the reason why like something like that Rap magazine would work really well is you aren't doing this because you're trying to find a market or trying to fill a niche or do something like that. You're trying to release the comics that you really want out in the world that reflect what you want for comics. And I think that's part of the reason why ShortBox was as special as it was and why it became so beloved is that people found like, so many people have a really tough time finding the comic book for themselves in like the sea of choices they could possibly make. But 3 times a year, and then through the Kickstarters and everything else, you would make those choices for them. And I don't know, that's magical. I think you did a really cool thing.
Thank you. I think it's, again, I don't know if this is a too idealized thought, but I generally feel that if you're sincere in what you do, in terms of like, it's not like, oh, I'm doing this for the money, or I'm doing this for X, Y, Z reason, or like there's a lot of in comics, I feel like this kind of networking thing where, oh, I'm going to do this because, again, like this might sound super harsh. So one kind of example of this is like when somebody says like, oh, my friend has made this book and it's really great. And it's like, it might not be great, it might be shit, but because your friend made it, you just kind of like
talk it up.
I understand the impulse because of course you care about your friend, but I would never do that, which might sound like a bitch. But I just feel that I don't know, like whatever reason, I just would not say like a book is good just because my friend made it.
Sure.
I feel like I always try to be, and I feel like that's why, again, like I have any kind of audience that I have, because I feel like people always trust me. Again, like same when I used to review books, I never said like a book was this or that for any reason other than it was always just like, do I like it? Don't I like it? Why? What? There was no other reason or kind of like motivation behind it. It's not like, oh, I must say, like people definitely, when I used to write about comics, and even now, because I still know a lot of the same people definitely wrote things because they thought it would get them somewhere. No, I don't know if you're aware of some of that. Like, oh, if I said this about like, DC, or I don't know if it works. Maybe I'd be more successful if I
Well,
did.
that does bring up an interesting thing. Do you think you would be happy working in an ecosystem where you have to publish what the market wants versus what somebody else wants?
No. I don't think I could do like as frustrated as I sometimes feel, because I'm like, how nice would it be to just like sometimes I see these salaries and I just like, oh, I love to have a job where, I just get paid like 80 grand a year, and I'm making, I don't have to, again, like I said, like I don't have to do all this business stuff. I'm just editing comics. But then I think like the idealized version is right. The idea, again, the dream would be like somebody's paying me that six-figure sum and I'm also like making exactly the comics I want. But I feel like there's no way that's going to happen.
Right.
I'm never going to get that level of trust from a company. So if you're at a company, it's always going to be like, these are the books we make, and here's what we want you to make. I think this is like even on a smaller level, like this happened like briefly when Piao, I worked with Piao very briefly,
Hmm.
and like like we're both pretty small, like that's just a few, two or three guys and I'm like one person, so they like the guys and I have always gotten along well, and they were like, oh, you should come and we're looking for an editor, and I was like, yeah, tra-la-la-la. And of course we all love each other, let's make comics together. And then I went and I made two books that I'm really proud of: Gene Way's Heat and Michael Furler's Spark Girl, which I personally think are the strongest PR books, with no bias whatsoever. But then after that, like, so I was getting all these really interesting pitches, and whenever I pitched something to the guys, they were like, "This is now a PR book," and I was like, "Well, like, well, why have you hired me? Because surely you know what I do, and that's why you want me, right?" Because, but I could also understand their perspective, like they want what a PR book is, but I don't really make. I mean, I can only do what I'm good at, what I feel is good. I'm good at. So then, we stopped working together. But I feel like it's going to be the same at any company, right? Like, I feel nobody's going to be like, oh, okay, Zainab, we're going to start a new imprint or line for you, and you just do what you want, and here's the money and here's the resources.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. I feel like if I ever were to get a job, it'd just be like, oh, like my friend Lucy's always saying, just apply for a job. And she sent me these links, and she's like, oh, here's, look, they want a graphic editor, like a Penguin Random House, the kids line. And I'm like, those books are horrible. Like this, so like awful. I mean, I don't want to do that. So like as frustrated as I feel, like, all the financial sort of like, I don't know whether there's gonna be any money, like the fair this year, as much as I'm taking a percentage, that relies on if it's actually gonna do well. If it doesn't do well, I don't do well.
Yeah.
So it's like it's all up in the air. So there's no financial stability. But again, like I feel like I'm very kind of like stubborn and very uncompromising in many ways. So I don't feel like I could go work for somebody who didn't let me do, what I wanted to do. I was talking to John Allison about this as well, because I was just like having a big moan on Instagram, like, oh, nobody gives me a job, haha. And he's like, Zainab, he was like, Zainab, nobody's going to give you a job. It's like once you've done everything, it's really hard. Like we were talking about, like from top to bottom. Like he's done the same thing. Been through what I've been through, like where he's self-published all his comics, all the conventions. And now of course he works with Oni, and I think no, is it Boom and Oni he works with?
I think he's worked with Boom and Dark Horse the most recently.
But he was like self-publishing for a really long time.
Yeah.
And he still does self-publish. Like he did that Giant Days Batman comic, which I really loved.
Somebody actually got a thought bubble for me and mailed it to me. The very nice production. I don't know if it was foil. I don't remember what it was, but it was very shiny on the front.
I think it's holographic. Yeah, it's a holographic. Yeah, and it's like a really specific vibe. But he was just, I think the point that he was making is that you're not going to be happy working for somebody else, like when you've done everything. And it's not that you know better necessarily, although sometimes that is the case. But I think it's just really difficult to slot in to somewhere when you've done, I don't know, when you can see, I guess, all the moving parts and you've kind of been all the moving parts. It's fun.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Zoop is the new home for creator-owned crowdfunding, and they are doing some exciting new things in the space. Be sure to join the Horde of Vault Comics crowd-building campaign. Barbaric Born in Blood #1 is free to all who sign up, and the more fans who sign up, the more items get unlocked for everyone. Also, if you ever want to own a piece of Zoop, now you can. They're running an equity crowdfunding campaign where your contribution will get you shares in the company, as well as other perks. Visit republic.com/Zoop to support and become an investor in Zoop. Stay tuned for more exciting announcements about new features and new projects, such as the upcoming campaigns from the likes of Adriana Mello, Christian Ward, and the live campaigns by Paul Cornell, Chris Weston, and more. For creators looking to crowdfund your project, Zoop is currently open for submissions. Email them at hello@wearezoop.com to start a campaign. And now, back to the show. I think that's one of the interesting things is I don't think, like, if you were not the way you are sounds like I'm like saying that you're not like something typical or something like that. I guess maybe you aren't typical, but the reason why Comics and Cola worked as well as it did, the reason why ShortBox worked as well as it did, and the reason why ShortBox Comics Fair continues to work as well as it does is because you have that kind of perspective that you know what you want. And like that's the tricky thing is like I find that a lot of modern media, like whether it's like books or TV shows or movies or whatever, comics, etc., they have this like idea that they want to be for everybody, and they don't really feel like they're for anybody because of that. And like if you don't really have a perspective behind it, you're going to have a tough time making a really amazing piece of art. And I think that's, I don't know, it's interesting from a marketability standpoint, from a your salary standpoint. Would it be more prudent to say I want to make comics for everybody? Maybe, but your own happiness is equally important, if not more important, I imagine.
Yeah, and I also I genuinely don't understand like how would you like or why would you like you know I don't know like why would you make comics that you're not interested in?
Oh yeah,
I don't again like I find it difficult to run unless like you're being paid like shed loads and like I'm ready to sell out, but I say that, but I don't think I would because I think I just hate it so much. Maybe for a year I could like if I could get paid for like a year and make enough money, and then I'd be like, see it. I don't know, but
what you need is a really wealthy investor who just wants you to do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I don't think people want to invest. Like we had that one weird meeting. It was such a weird meeting, and yeah, I was just like, I don't know. And I can tell you later who that was.
The time for the NDA was before the Zoom call, I want to say.
They didn't make me sign an NDA, so it was just like a weird thing. But yeah, I genuinely like I'm not the kind of person that I just like I said I wouldn't like one of the things that if there is I almost understand why businesses do it, even though I don't agree with it. Like there's so much money involved, there's so many people involved. So I can understand how we have to keep this thing going, so that's why we have to try and like get something that makes money, I guess, to keep us going. But I don't agree with it. I feel like I know like people really disagree with me, but I feel like it's such a time of like everything that is being put out is so shit. And I think I just really believe in being specific and making the thing that you want to make. And I know those sound like very generic statements, but I feel like if you bring them down to their core and not thinking about like audience or, I want to make this for like this kind of people or, I want to make this because I feel like people are into this. It's just like, I was supposed to be giving a talk at university this month, and I don't know what to tell those kids. Because I feel like it's so much of it has to do with like commercialism and capitalism, right? Because people feel that's why people feel that they have to make things it's either for an audience, and why is it for an audience? It's for money, right? And I think it's because how do you go to these kids at uni and be like, oh, you want to get these jobs, but none of these jobs are actually going to let you do the thing that you want to do. They're not going to let you express yourself or, make the thing that you want to make, So it is just like a job for the sake of money. That's what it becomes, really. It's not art in any kind of, I don't know, in definition of the word, the way I define it anyway. Yeah, I really don't know.
I mean, it just kind of depends on the person. It's like some people are very happy doing that. I mean, so for my podcast, one of the things that I try really hard to do is I try to talk to people whose work really interests me in one way or another. Because to be honest, it's like if there was something that somebody wanted to promote that I'm not interested in, I'm going to be very bad at faking it.
Yeah.
And I told somebody that worked in comics that once, and they were absolutely incredulous that I would do that. And I was just like, I can't not be me. And if like people are trying to listen to me or read me or like pay me to like read and listen to me, why would they want me to like just go through the motions? And that's a tricky thing. It's just like, would it be more financially prudent for me to be making a bunch of TikTok videos of our interviews and like doing things that are really focused on like, I don't know, whatever happened with Batman the most recent week? Maybe. But it's just, I don't know. You have to find what's right for you. And I think that's the thing is like, just like with the college students, it's like working for publisher X, Y, or Z might be exactly what they want and maybe what they've always dreamed, but that wouldn't work for you and it probably wouldn't work for me either. And it's just tricky though. It's like, what is the right answer? It depends on the person.
Yeah, maybe, perhaps. I think this is like what you said. When I started working, there's like a brilliant comic shops in
Okay, comics.
yeah, okay, comics. So I started working for Jared, and I was working two jobs. I was working in libraries and I was working at OK. And I used to think that I was really shit at selling comics. When I worked at OK, I was just really conscious of the fact. And then when I started publishing comics, I realized that it's not that I was shit at selling comics. I'm actually really good at it. It's just that I didn't care about like somebody would come in and be like, "Oh, what when Green Lantern did this," and I'm like, I don't know. I don't really care. Like I don't care. And that's not me shitting on superhero comics because everybody knows that I'm like a massive Batman fan. But it's just like, I feel like if you're in a shop, you have to really be aware of like all these kind of things. Because if customers come in and ask you, you have to like, be on the ball. But I just remember because like I had like such not a chip on my shoulder, but I was just like, I really like, I love Jared. And I really felt like I let him down because I was like, I'm not good at, people would come in and like the comics which I feel passionate about, nobody really ask, want those kind of comics. And so I always felt like I wasn't doing a very good job while I was at OK. And then when I go to conventions, I'm like, I'm really good at selling comics, like I can talk about these all day. And because again, like I feel because you're sincere and you're enthusiastic, that translates to people. I don't know, maybe I have too much of an idealized, I don't know, like if you fake it, do people like buy into that? But I guess they do because that's why like these huge marketing budgets and everything exist.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Did you find that people would respond to your pitches when you worked at OK Comics? Like if there was something you were really passionate about that people would be like, yeah, I'll check that out.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, for sure. I think it was just like I don't read most of what is referred to as mainstream comics at all. So I don't read any DC. I don't read any Marvel. I don't read a lot of like I don't read Image. um, so all this kind of stuff. And most comic book shops, that's their lifeblood, right?
Right.
And OK has a really mixed audience, to be fair, but still, that is like with that's like I would still say that's their bread and butter. And they've actually gotten like it's difficult for Jared as well because the space is so small. So to fit everything in, like, but they really expanded like into their manga, which like is really made me happy. I was just there today actually.
Nice.
It's really made me happy to see. But yeah, I think with that kind of thing, you really need someone who's gonna like hand sell it. And I wasn't there very long, and it was really interesting because like Jared afterwards, like he would tell me, it's like you're like actually one of my favorite people who ever worked at the shop, and I was like, what?
That's amazing.
And I was like, I thought you hated me. He was like, no. Why?
Well, and OK Comics has been around 20 years. That's a big deal. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, he's such a lovely man, and he's like, I hope he stays along. It's really tough for like independent, like truly, I know like in comics independent means like so many things.
Yeah.
Like he is like truly independent, like it's his shop.
The foot traffic stuff in Leeds, I've heard is really affecting him. I actually just ordered a bunch of books from OK Comics to try to support them. And
Yeah.
as you know, international shipping, not the most inexpensive. So Jared thankfully made the wise decision to send them all in a bundle because apparently one of them I ordered was not out yet. But I did have to, really quick aside, you mentioned you love a Batman. Did you really write a college dissertation on Batman?
Yes, I did. Yeah, that was a big it was kind of it's really interesting because people ask like how you get into comics. So I'm gonna give you like the boring story. So when I was younger, I read a lot of comics, but I think I don't know like if you have this experience, but I never made the distinction that oh, these are comics that I'm reading, In the UK, we have like a kids periodical called the Beano that I read a lot. And also Tintin, which I guess every Tintin and Asterix everybody reads. And then a lot of sort of Raymond Briggs. He's like a UK cartoonist who's really brilliant. I don't know if you know The Snowman.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so that's maybe it's just a UK thing. But he's one of those cartoonists who's kind of like so revered that he gets referred to like as a picture book person. So it's like, oh, he's not comics because he's too good for comics. He's kind of like an illustrator, an artist. So, but he's a cartoonist. He's passed away now. So we had like, so I would read a lot of comics, but then as I grew older, like I kind of stopped reading comics, I guess, because a lot of what I had access to was just it was just at the library, and there wasn't like a load of stuff. And then when I was doing my English literature degree, you have to do like this. I can't remember how many words, but it's like 10,000 or 5,000. I don't know. It was a lot.
Yeah.
I have to really choose a subject that I can kind of, if I'm going to do research on it, I have to stay interested in. So I think it was on like Batman and the contemporary relevance of the superhero. It was not very good. It was like, yeah, I still have it, but I don't, it's so cringy. It's just that kind of thing where like you're trying to sound important. It's kind of like, it's very much like the Immortal Hulk. When I read that, it's like, like as in front, like the Immortal Hulk, like there would be just this very generic quote from like something that everybody had read, and it's like, oh, I've read so many books. And that was like, I'm like, Al Ewing, you don't need to do this. This is like so basic, it's so juvenile. But that was how I was doing like at the beginning of my dissertation. It was like, oh, pity the land that has no heroes, pity the land that needs them. And I'm like, it was not good, but that's how it did get me back into comics. So that was really nice. It was just like a byproduct, and that's why I started actually blogging, because when I finished my degree, I think I've just always been that kind of person, because I remember when I finished my degree, my dad was like, "Oh, so you're going to start teaching then?" And I was like, "No." It's like, "Well, why did you do this English degree?" And I was like, "I just really enjoy reading and writing." And he was like, "What?" And I'm like, yeah, I just did it because I really love literature, and he did not understand. But when I finished, I was like, oh, you kind of need to keep writing about something, otherwise I would just stop writing. So that was how I started blogging about comics.
So did you have any inclination that you wanted to do anything in comics before this all happened, or was it just it just happened?
No, like same as like when I started blogging about comics, it was genuinely just because I wanted to keep writing about something once I'd finished my degree. And I had sort of gotten back into comics. I was like, oh, I'm just write about all this stuff that I'm reading. And like I was not connected to any kind of comic scene or anything like that. I would literally just like Google like the best Hulk comics and like like I always look at the art and the stuff that seemed appealing. I was like, oh yeah, I'll order a bunch of that, and then like this kind of thing, and read stuff like that. And then I started blogging. I got like a few offers to write for different places, and there was no money in it, but it was fun to do. And then that was like kind of how ShortBox started. And same, like I had no intention to like publish, but kind of fell into that. I did really love it before it became very overwhelming. And just like got to that point where like every email and every social media tweet that feels like such immense pressure. But yeah, here we are, I guess.
It kind of seems like your entire career in comics has been kind of
a fluke.
No, I was going to say created by a desire to highlight the things that you really love in comics, because I don't know. In that same, I think it was in the Make It Then Tell Everybody interview. It might have been in a Comics Reporter one with Tom Spurgeon, but you were talking about how you just write about what interests you when you were on Comics and Cola. You weren't trying to you were trying to be yourself. And that's the same thing with ShortBox. That's the same thing with ShortBox Comics Fair. You had 1,600 different ones to look through this year, and you ended up with 115. It's probably the ones that speak to you the most. And I don't know. It seems like a career created by love and passion for comics and reading.
Yeah, I guess so. I think so. Like, I feel like comics are so special, like, genuinely feel that they're so special because I feel like, like this marriage of like pictures and text. I don't think like most Western comics, they don't like, I feel like the tip of the iceberg,
Yeah.
in terms of like, you'll get a lot of comics and it's like, okay, so, you can use images and you can use text, right? So, like, that's to me, that's like, as a kid, that's what I loved about comics. Like, they're so rich. It's like, oh my God, you get words and you get pictures, and they're both supposed to do different shit, right?
Right.
And a lot of comics, you'll just get like the man with a sad face, and then he'll be like, I am sad. And it's like, no, they're both doing the same thing. That's not like why you're wasting the words, you're wasting the pictures, right? Do something different. And like, you can just do so much, like, paneling, layouts, you don't have to have panels, you don't have to have words. And I feel like when I like talk about these things, I know sometimes it sounds like I'm being overly critical, but I generally just do it because I feel like the potential is so immense. And I think it's like such a special medium. But I feel like a lot of the days nowadays, like the writing is just like down the drain. And when I say writing, I don't mean like writers specifically, but I just feel like maybe because with a lot of social media being such a visual medium, and people will post images on there and they get so much feedback for the images that they don't think that the images have to be written also. Like, even if you draw a picture, like there's a chair in a room underneath a window, like there's still writing involved. Like, what's the lighting, what's the coloring, why those choices are being made, what's the placement, what's the composition. All that is part of writing. And I just feel like there's not, there's so few comics I read where I feel like the writing, again, like when I'm saying writing, I don't mean text.
Yeah, yeah.
To be specific, writing is visual also. And it's, I feel like that is really rare where I read something and I'm like, wow, that was, like the writing was so solid. Like, some very few people do it really well. I just wish more people did it. And I think it comes also from, you have to read a lot. You have to, that's where it comes from. Like, you have to read a lot of, not just comics, just a lot. Like, I read a lot of prose books, and nothing special. I just read a lot of crime fiction mostly. But again, like, that's like, I guess, a little bit sort of shitting on the genre, and I don't mean to, like, I think it's great, otherwise I wouldn't read it. But I feel like people don't go beyond like a certain sphere of like what they consume, like these very specific kind of movies, or even if it's something like, oh, Miyazaki movies.
Yeah.
And I think Miyazaki's fine. But which is not a popular opinion, but it's like, okay, so what, like, what's next? Like, there's no like depth or complexity to it. But I read like last week I read The Gulf by Adam D'Souza, which is like a new YA book, and it's really, I was so surprised by it actually, because I've not like I've seen his, I don't know if you may have come across them, they're quite popular, the Blind Alice comic strips, cartoon strips, right? Okay, so I mean, they don't do much for me, but like I was really surprised by the book. Like, it's a YA book, but I feel like maybe part of it is just like we've had like this big churn of like these very anodyne, vaguely queer YA romances, finding myself, whatever shit. And because like I feel like that comes from like one that sold really well, like whether it was like This One Summer, and now you get like, which has led all the way to like this dilution where we get like something shit like Heartstopper. And but it's really good because it's about a young 17-year-old who sort of like, she runs away to join a commune, but the writing again is so well done, and like it's got like a lot of anger and frustration in it. Like, she doesn't want to get a job, and she doesn't, why do I have to do all these things that like, so I can take on a loan and have a mortgage and be unhappy. And it was like, it's also like really respectful of the fact that that her feelings are valid, and it's not like, oh, she's just a teenager and she's getting a bit marky, like, it's like, no. I feel like a lot of people are feeling that way, and it's really interesting to see that, to be frank, to see that book got published, even if it doesn't go deep into those issues. But I feel like even something like that, a basic sort of discussion of those issues was really I was really heartened by it, and I'm really glad that like kids have that, and hopefully it reaches a lot of people. But it went off on a tangent, but I just saying.
No, it's great. I feel like I'm 50-50 on a guess as to what your answer would be for this, but do you feel like your experiences with first Comics and Cola and then ShortBox and now ShortBox Comics Fair has meaningfully changed your relationship with comics? Like how you feel about them and how you view them?
I mean, I think I started out loving them, and I still really love them.
Mm-hmm.
In that kind of thing. I feel like what I appreciate a lot more is like it's kind of, I don't know if I want to say this because in a way it sounds like it's like a miracle that they get made, right? And I know like you can say that about like other mediums, but I feel with comics especially because there's so little infrastructure. Again, like I'm not talking about DC and Marvel or, maybe book publishers, but like for me, like because I'm really just working like on a very small press indie level. But there are so many people, there's like hundreds of people on that level because it's so incredibly time consuming and laborious and intensive that I really appreciate the people who make them. And I feel like it's so tough because I feel there's nobody out there who's paying cartoonists properly. Like literally nobody.
Yeah.
Even the book publishers. And if it's just like really sad because I feel like I said, I feel like it's a brilliant medium or art form, whatever you want to call it. I'm not really fussed. And the thing is, like, I genuinely believe that there's an audience for it, right? Like, if I feel like if I, at a very sort of like microscopic level, can find an audience, right, and enough of an audience, like last year the fair, I think, like we did like over 300,000 in sales, 100,000 unique visitors. Again, like that's me on one person, right? One person, and I strongly feel that if there was somebody who did it like the right way, again, like and had the resources, I feel like we could find, like a reach those bigger audiences. But I think it comes back to what you were saying. People don't want to take a chance. They want that thing. They want to make that thing that's for everybody, so it becomes for nobody. So that's why we get that dross, and then they're like, "Oh, it doesn't work," and it's like, "No, it doesn't work because you made this shit thing, that you didn't believe in." And I feel like, especially in Western comics, like this big gap, I don't know if people are going to fill it, like for adult comics, which mostly, I guess, gets filled by manga. But so there's all these, like in Western, like North American comics, like there's all these YA comics, it's comics for kids, but where do those people go after that? Because they have nowhere to go, they just go to manga. But I feel like there are so many people who are chomping at the bit. And I think of the fair, again, like on a very small level, I think that's one of the reasons why cartoonists really love it, because they can make, those kind of comics like, oh, I don't actually, I'm just going to make this thing that's kind of complex and, it's actually for adults. And when I say like adult comics, I'm not talking about like, oh, there's lots of sex and violence in it, but I'm just like, as like me as a 30 something, I don't want to read about as much as I enjoy those books, I don't always want to read about like a teen trying to find themselves, a teen having a romance,
Right. Yeah.
I want to read about all this other shit that we as grown-ups, as adults experience, There's so much, the scope is like limitless. And again, like because I've made those comics and I've connected those comics with audiences, I feel like the audience is there, Again, like I feel like the potential. That's why, again, like I have that dream, like if somebody would give me a load of money and let me I feel like I could make it successful. And I feel like whoever does it, I feel like somebody's going to do it. A company is going to hopefully take the chance and start making like these kind of adult comics. But I hope they do. I know, like, but so I really believe in audiences because I feel like, again, like I can only relate it to my experience, but I feel like people say that audiences are dumb, and I just don't believe that, because I feel like we've always managed to find an audience, and we've made like so many weird comics, in all kind of genres that don't fit any kind of genre, that talk about, sci-fi, fantasy, biography, all kind of stuff. And we've always managed to find an audience. So when people say the audience isn't there, I don't think that's true. I think like the gap is like, having the resources to try to connect audiences with the stuff that you're making, and also more importantly, making the right kind of stuff, I guess.
I hope you find that wealthy supporter who's going to help you do what you do, because you do amazing things. But that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about ShortBox, the comics fair, your life, and everything else. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh no, thank you for having me. I am very rambly, so I appreciate you bearing me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with ShortBox Comics Fair's Zainab Akhtar. You can find her work in the ShortBox Comics Fair. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman for stepping in to edit this week's episode. If it sounds better than usual, it's because of her. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including John Auerbach, Dustin Weaver, Ninja Assassin Love Story webcomic, Brandon Heyman, John Neesmith, Aiden Hammond, Kenny Myers, JKJ Art, Faith Aaron Hicks, Yeah Comics, Ben Rowe, Cameron Brown, Jonathan Breen, Danny Ollie, Charlie Stickney, Tom Drennan, Jeremy Thomas Burke, Jared Schwab, Scott Dunn, Chip Mosher, Seth Pomeroy, James McEwen, Andrew Lehman, Christina Merkler, Scott Place, Travis Gibb, Darcy Van Polgees, Travis Schmeiser, Tom Evans, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian Holt, Nira Levy, Jason Hussa, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Django Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Beachy, Ben Domstead, Ron V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Vandeven, Submed Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Choi, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Bauer, Declan Shalvey, Dan Carino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Liana Kangas, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Pullo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Stephen Holt, Philip Myrick, Chris Pachal, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Achilles, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Nick Polito, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendrick, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Odd Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out both their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.